Thanks, Antonia. It's been a wonderful invitation to participate and get to work with the Australian Tapestry workshop. They've been so generous, and it's just been, from the outset, just a really great experience. I suppose they were interested in my work. I suppose I'll just talk about the parameters of what we thought about for the design when initially approached. But briefly, I've got, there was some slides and some images of my work and my practice over the years. I'm predominantly concerned sort of with, I suppose, like the social politics, like how people connect with one another, how they connect with place, and so predominantly sort of in Australia's context and our sort of rich sort of multicultural society. I'm really interested in Australia's connections with migrant communities and this sort of there's constant history of travel and movement and habitation within Australia. So my work sort of deals with migration across, the history of Australia and economic trade and social kind of interactions. So under that sort of gamut of multicultural Australia and all the different sort of communities that Australia really has to offer, I think this kind of project developed because of Dovecot. It sort of developed under that sort of umbrella of the Commonwealth, and I think initially there was this sort of intent of sort of paying attention to the Commonwealth today. So that was kind of one of the main sort of gamuts in thinking about this work. And so for myself, today the Commonwealth is, it's an interesting sort of structure to think about. It's very generous, and there's an amazing kind of history, and it's also a very kind of permanent kind of contemporary space to think about. So that was sort of the overarching theme that I was like trying to work out. How do we look at the Commonwealth today, and sort of what legacies has it got, and what promises in the future. And I suppose I was kind of thinking, like recent research for me, I've been really concerned with ocean trades and the idea of the ocean as a place of travel and transport. So that kind of then fed into it, that basically such a big crux of the Commonwealth and the English Empire was about its sort of maritime power, and then the relationships of the ocean and the tides and the currents, and this kind of beautiful imagery of the ocean and the idea of water and coursing and weaving, I kind of thought really fed into an idea of tapestry and that sort of process and time and motion. So I wanted to deal with that. So the works, so I was thinking about how the oceans are really such a giving and sort of such a generous place for contact. They kind of have developed economical relations, social relations. They are the movement for mankind. How do we sort of approach that as a Commonwealth now, and what kind of situation are our oceans in today with all this mass trade, with mass fishing and shipping and pollutants? So I've been quite environmentally concerned as well with our oceans, and so these are the two kind of concerns. So as we travel around more, we kind of denigrate our seas, and yet they've been such a vital and giving force for so many years. So that's what then fed into the work, and I've been interested in different ways of the seas being polluted, oil spills, and how we maintain them and how we manage them. So some series have been dealing with this idea of with the movement upon the seas and our sort of mass inhabitation of them, there is also mass destruction, and I've been interested in the sense of the stories of when we had civilizations that were so dependent upon the seas, and we didn't really know, we didn't really have the mastery. We had this kind of amazing kind of mythologies and stories around the sea. We have mermaids, and we have all these grand tales, and as we kind of have mastery of the seas, those kind of sense of those omens and those tales and those things of fear kind of give way to our own kind of maneuvers. So going from that, I was sort of researching those kind of narratives, and then researching the contemporary realities. And it made me started to think that as we sort of erode our seas, sea turtles, dolphins, all these could one day become like the mist that future generations start to dream of. So the porpoises become the mermaids, and this kind of destruction or evolution. So for me, the Commonwealth is maybe about how these countries can work together to sort of make sustainable our futures, and it's sort of a giving. So those oceans and those tides that have given so much can actually need to be kind of sort of saved again. So this work is predominantly about that. The black mass is basically like a sea and the ocean. And then within it, it's talking about actually contemporary pollutants in our oceans. So I originally started looking at marine worms a couple of years back because there's been research sort of underway in Ireland, and there's a big European consortium as we try and look at ways of dealing with oil spills. Obviously there's man-made ways of dealing with them, which are kind of quite, they're not very sustainable. BP will sometimes go in and just sort of start lighting oil just to burn it up. But in that time, animals and sea life that is caught within those waters of oil are just sort of doubled out, just burnt to death. So there's all different ways, and so there's environmental scientists and stuff now investigating kind of biological ways that we can try and deal with these kind of pollutions. And marine worms have been one that have come up in regards to oil spills, because they marine worms sort of are found like throughout sort of basically all the waterways. So they can be found like deep underneath. They can be found in actual water spirals. They kind of there's many different stratas, but they can be found across, and they kind of work in a way, like an analogy is that they do really work like earthworms. They burrow through, and in their movements they disrupt the sediment, they oxygenate the waters, and so they naturally kind of biologically break up oil. So scientists have been looking at them as a possible kind of environmental, ecologically natural way of maybe sort of trying to use them to deal with oil spills. So really interesting, there's just these minute sort of particles in the whole stream of cause and effect. And so originally I started working with these marine worms and painting them, and so the black is sort of the oil that's falling off this marine worm, is about the oil, and so it's about this kind of actually being able to turn back to nature to find resolution or to find solutions. And so as I was reading about that, I started to read about other pollutants in the sea, and plastic pollution is really one of the vital or biggest pressing mainstream pollutions of our seas. Oil spills occur and they become these drastic sort of concentrated effects that we hear about, but really that continual breakdown of plastic that we just put into our water seas is just there, and plastic just continues to erode and erode into smaller and smaller particles. And they're chemically disruptive because it's not just about the plastic that doesn't break down, but the actual composition of them being sort of made of flame retardants and chemicals that really can't break down and really leach into the water, and they leach into, from the bottom upwards, from these marine worms onwards. There's a cycle of consumption of these plastics. And recently, there's been actually a lot of stuff on the net about skin scrubs that actually have really small microplastic beads in them. And so there's been a recent thing with Neutrogena, I think it is. And so it's quite interesting that this topic is about this breakdown of plastics, but it's actually becoming a bit more of a kind of wider concern. So now there's actually research happening in Western Australia and CSIRO. So I think this is another thing that feeds back into the Commonwealth, was that this research that scientists are doing, they're done in those two universities, that feeds into a Commonwealth structure. So for me, that was another relationship that fed back into it. But you have these kind of scientific groups that are working together, and it's sort of beyond boundaries and beyond these national ties as we try and solve these kind of grander landscapes. And that's another, I think, encouraging prospect about these kind of older forms of networking. But so research in Western Australia, for example, the water around Australia, for every square kilometre, there's 4,000 particles of microbeads. That's the sort of the amount pollution in our own Australian waters. So that was another thing about Commonwealth, and just understanding our own, like the oceans really, they don't know our kind of political breakups and sections, they just keep flowing and, moving across, and so we have to be aware not just of our own kind of land masses and immediate waters, but the waters that we share, and that's kind of a generosity of spirit. But so these microbeads, they've realised that even the worms can't obviously digest these, and they digest them and it retards their process and it slows them down. So in the end, while we might be researching them as these amazing possible helps in the sense of dealing with oil spills, if their waters are infected with such major plastics that they're already on a downhill spiral, it's really kind of a never-ending sort of cycle of dismay. But these are kind of concentrated science. These are what scientists are doing and researching into, which I think is it gives us hope. But it's quite amazing. So basically, the work deals with sort of the idea of water and this flowing effect, and just the way the connections between us as states and people. And what I have done is sort of illustrated or drawn these kind of microbeads and colours, but they actually map out the actual Commonwealth countries of the world. So these colourful sections are an idea of microbeads in the water, but they also map out our Commonwealth. So we've got a map up there, and you can see the direct relationship. So all the dark blue on that map is the Commonwealth countries, and we've got the rest of the world. I suppose another sort of feedback into this concept of relating the Commonwealth and Australia and our own concerns was also paying tribute to the history of Australia and the original inhabitants, and how dealing with Australia in a decolonised state. The title of the work kind of is a quote to I feel the embarrassing funny parent, but anyway, the Aboriginal communities in the Mallee, the Burong people in the Mallee, northwestern Victoria, they were recent carbon dating now kind of places them in northwestern Victoria for about 30,000 to 40,000 years ago. So they've had a long-standing relationship with the land, and I had also been researching in this idea of seas and tides, the ideas of constellations, because constellations looking into the stars also help us map our travels and our journeys. And I became interested in the ideas of the constellations we have mapped from a Eurocentric manner, and our Virgos and Leos and so forth, and the Aboriginal constellations of the possum and the mallee fowl and these other animals. And so I've been sort of looking at constellations and trying to map them up and refiguring the different shapes in the sky that we have all imagined as different heritages. So the Burong people have a quite, they used to say that they had sort of the most developed constellation language in Australia. And so they have this sort of idea of mapping the stars and it relating back to the Earth. And so that's where the title comes from. So everything has two witnesses, and it comes in a larger text. Because it's quite beautiful, I think, this context. This is what an elder had said, and has been quoted, and this was quoted down in 1993. Everything under the creation is represented in the soil and in the stars. Everything has two witnesses, one on earth and one in the sky. Everything is represented in the ground and in the sky. And so basically, going back into their sort of readings and theories, for example, they have a constellation that is called, they have a figure which is actually the mallee fowl, and she's called, I don't know if the pronunciation is right, it's Neoland, and she emerges in the southern hemisphere between March and October, which is the time when the mallee fowl comes to start building its mounds. And so it's a sign. So when the stars sort of fall in that, when that hemisphere, which we know as Lyra, when that constellation comes in, that's when the Malleefowl start preparing their mounds. And so there's this sort of direct relationship between the metaphoric Malleefowl and the real Malleefowl on the ground. But this constant relation of looking back and forth and finding these relationships in nature, and having this idea that there is a testimony, there's a witness for every action that we do on Earth, either in the stars or in the sea, is kind of what is the point and the reference into leading into this work. I think that sort of kind of covers some of the main concerns of the work. And
Well, can I just say what a privilege it's been working with Sangeeta, and I've got to say, when the artwork arrived and the artist statement, I was sort of like, oh my goodness, it made me feel so insignificant in the scheme of things. So, oh, what a brain I'm working with. But I suppose the more and more I thought about it was one of the privileges of being a tapestry weaver is that you're creating something which is so rare in this time, something that takes time and that fits into this history of a body of tapestries that have been around for so long. And I honestly do feel like, who knows what will happen to the world, but, the best case scenario is that these tapestries will live on way beyond any of us. And I just think if they carry stories like this, that we look back at, 16th century tapestries, if they can convey stories like we sort of appreciate looking backwards, it's a really important thing because so much that's been created or written or talked about or is ethereal, it's all gone. So to have that, to be able to actually make something is really important. So, all of us in the workshop endeavour every time we work with an artist is to capture the spirit of that work, and that's the most important thing, and it's the thing that's most satisfying and gratifying in what we do. And I just was thinking about it, and I've been writing notes actually as you've been talking, because I was thinking, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, you go and look at old tapestries, and I think some of the tapestries that stand in my mind, and in fact they're actually about horrendous exploitation of the environment, like the Devonshire hunting tapestries or the Maximilian Hunt tapestries, or they often document some of the worst characteristics of human people, and in a way the story in these tapestries is the same. So we're seduced by these beautiful things that have got actually horrible stories in them. And I just sort of think if there's a parallel, it's really, really interesting. It's really interesting. So what I was very conscious of with this design is that initially it is so beautiful, it is so seductive, it is so, captivating, and I really wanted to capture that feel. Now, being so familiar with the medium, it just can't help but when you've woken for as long as I have, I was really struck by a very happy coincidence that Sangeeta had done these fine lines and I had a technical way of translating them that was going to work really, really well. And it was, it's funny because in fact we wove the tapestry upside down by a strange sort of misunderstanding, but in fact it was never really a problem, and in fact I'm so pleased we did it that way because it actually meant that the bigger proportion of the tapestry was really resolved before I got to the lighter area, more sort of in some ways pretty areas. So obviously one of the characteristics of that area is that sense of depth, and so I was really, rather than thinking of it as watercolour, what I was really, even though it has that sort of characteristic, what I was really working on was capturing that sense of depth and the feeling that there's, and in fact what's really interesting is certain light, you get that even more effectively. So that these little islands and little sort of bits of plastic and everything are actually somewhere in this sort of sea. And the other thing that I was really conscious of, and it's something that, it's really interesting when people first come into the workshop and we say, well, we've got 376 colours in wool, and we've got 200 and something colours in cotton, and it's sort of like, wow, how do you... One of the real skills of the weaver is actually, that less is more sort of story. And I was very conscious of trying to break it down into simple areas. So basically I had a very, very simple palette for the grey water area, which is just basically this. I spoke to Sangeeta, and it was something early on I wanted to sort of see if she agreed with. I actually made a slightly cooler palette, because I just felt like in wool it was going to work a bit better. And then of course I did this sample with the sumac, which is over the surface, and discussed that with Sangeeta too. But that was really all of the sampling that I did. I had, which is really interesting, and it's something that I think all of you are probably aware of, is we have this bank of samples up in the back corner, and where possible, when you've been here a long time, you go back and you refer to tapestries that you've woven before. And this little strip of all artists is Yvonne Audette, so Chris Collingwood knows this one well. And I just thought that in a funny way, this captured quite a lot of the feel that I saw that the little islands and plastics would sort of be woven like. So I had these things to start off with. And one of the luxuries of working on work on your own is it's not something I would want to do all the time, because it's wonderful working with a team and having discussions, but you do have a luxury of being able to have that vision in your head, and you don't actually have to sort of convey it to everybody completely. You can actually keep a few of those decisions up your sleeve for as you go. You don't have to be committed to everything. So I had some ideas, but I was, partly because, every project, we are a production workshop. Every project we work on, we have budgets, we have time frames. I looked at it and thought, yes, I'm going to do all this sumac, but my goodness, I can't commit too much to doing, lots and lots of details, because what if I'm running out of money or time or, So I've got to say that was one of the wonderful things, that when I got to the top area and I had plenty of time, I was able to indulge myself and do all of that detail. The other thing, which of course is really important to Sangeeta's work, and you'll see on that image, is the shadow. And that was something that we discussed at our first meeting, was the fact that, yes, we could weave the worms separately, but it would have actually been very, very clunky, because those lovely fine sort of tendrily sort of hair things, that would have been very, very difficult. So we decided to work with illusion. And you can see on the board underneath Sangeeta's original work, there's a photocopy there with a shadow, and Sangeeta got a photographer to take that photograph, and that was my reference for the shadow. Now, when you're working in art, you can't help but sort of, look at other artists and think, oh, that's a bit Matisse. I really like that, those cutouts. So I actually really was very, very keen to treat them really simply. And again, that's just such a lovely contrast. So in fact, it's fairly unusual. The black is actually all one colour, and the grey is all one colour bar, one fleck. So I wanted to have that as a really, really simple element, or really simple elements, so as the exotic mixing of the worm would actually sit forward from that very simple background. I'm still looking at it, because I only wound it up this afternoon, so I kept looking at it thinking, because even though I've seen a big proportion of it, all the time, it is really interesting when you see the entirety of a tapestry, and simple things like the background, in the grey background. It's probably not all that obvious, initially, but there was actually a lot of planning, and I made a decision that up towards the worm, I was actually going to simplify the treatment of that area and actually darken it, so as the actual tendrils of the worm would hopefully sit forward. And it was great when I started weaving those and it was doing what I wanted it to do. Because again, you can make these plans, but until you actually do it, you're never quite sure that it's going to work. I think the other thing that I was going to say about it is that, again, what I'm really, really happy about is that I think it really is very seductive. I just think there's something about it that's so seductive, and it really is conveying. It'll make an audience think about what they're looking at, I think, and look into it, and the narrative quality of it is it's just beautiful. But that's all thanks to Sangeeta's original design. She just gave me such a wonderful sort of start.
Well, I think I should be able to explain that. I thought I hadn't explained that part so much of my practice before, and that was a big part of working together on this tapestry, was that a big part of my work is I do work a lot with paper and cutting out, and in other forms as well. And because I sort of deal with these subject matters which are about connections, or about sort of multicultural theory and these ideas of hybrid spaces or in-between spaces, like where people meet, those in-between areas, those grey areas, those third spaces that were all kind of coined, in the 80s to 90s with cultural studies and hybridity theory, was that when I was sort of working and beginning my practice, those were essential kind of points of contact and knowledge for me that I wanted to grasp. And so when I make my work, those concerns was about visualizing that other space. So in making works, I want them to always have a sort of a shift or a shadow, and that shadow for me is that visual articulation of that in-between or that third space, so that every time my work is shown, while it's always an object or a painting or cutout, the sense of place is always shifted because of lighting and a new gallery. The shadows will always change, and that's that sort of ephemeral section that is always in with the work, and it talks about that constant dynamic opportunity of change that we have with any kind of ways of thinking or theory. So the shadow for me, in whenever I make a work, is a very integral component of the structure and about working work. And I think that was something that when we started working, you were keen to actually sort of to deal with that integral component of my work. And so it was about me going away, thinking about the design, but also thinking about still working in my normal practice and making a shadow. And that was, for me, really engaging, because that is such a paramount part of the practice, but having that opportunity to, one, have a translation of the work, and then have it translated, and the idea of the shadow still being there, but it's in a new form anyway, and a new way of representing the works in that sense of change. And so that's why Sue had the reference to the original work, but we also we needed to photograph a static shadow that could become the interpretation for the final tapestry. And seeing that happen in this work, and just seeing it now tonight, that sort of sense of perspective. And like you said, that it brought out all these, there are these kind of elements in there, the black and the oil, but they carry such a different dynamic and graphic in the tapestry. And as you say, that's a really nice reference to say Matisse. That's beautiful. But to get this other kind of dynamic in the translation from the cutout and the watercolor into the tapestry is something that is that's all Sue's expertise. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we made a good pair. No, look, I think it's really it does something that I love about tapestry. It offers a work that I think whoever ends up buying it will keep looking into it and finding, all sorts of things there, and it's got a sense of wonderment. Yeah. And hopefully the worm will win.
Yeah.